These changes in the laws will save lives. The semi-automatic assault rifles are rapid-firing weapons. When they're used, there's mass carnage.
This has been a difficult day for our community.
Heartbreak in a quiet Mukilteo neighborhood after gunfire erupts at a house party.
He texted his friend, "I'm a shooter. I'm killing everyone at a huge party."
Of course I'm angry.
And we are here to say that this year, the legislature needs to act and lead to reduce gun violence.
No more silence and gun violence!
The youth of Washington State are infuriated.
Do I need 30 rounds in that rifle? Who says how many rounds it will take to stop a threat? That's how many you need.
It should not have been so easy for this angry 19-year-old to purchase a rifle.
Do I have an opinion about it? Yeah, absolutely. I think it's 100% unconstitutional.
I know I'm at home when I see a pickup truck with rifle racks.
We've passed 2 initiatives, and people still have their hunting rifles. They still have appropriate usage of their handguns when they're safely trained and stored.
Government has no business how you store your firearm in the house.
The idea that stronger gun laws don't make communities safer is simply not based in fact.
I ducked my head and I gunned it, and he took a shot through my windshield.
Authorities are investigating a shooting spree in Tumwater.
Police say the suspect was killed here by a bystander with a gun.
He is a hero. If this customer hadn't done what he did, yeah, he's a hero.
There are common sense things that we know we can do to keep guns out of the hands of people who should not have them.
Our Second Amendment is infringed upon by gun grabbers pushing an agenda based purely on emotion.
This is a Browning design from 107 years ago. This is now an assault rifle.
I believe that law is unconstitutional, so I will not enforce it.
It's clearly the will of the people of the state of Washington.
They do not have a right to think that there are many Supreme Courts.
Bottom line is, if they were totally honest with you, they'd want all of your guns.
My job is to make sure the law is followed, and what I'm here to say is the law is going to be followed even if the sheriffs go AWOL and don't do their job.
I would tell them to get the hell out of my county. I would hope they're smart enough not to go knocking on doors.
Are we going to let them take our rights?
You'd have a fight on your hands.
My son was shot in the back in the summer of 2016 here in Mukilteo in a shooting that took the lives of 3 of his friends. He was nearly taken from us.
Paul Kramer is the citizen sponsor of Initiative 1639, the package of new gun control measures approved by a majority of Washington state voters in November of 2018. A couple of years before that, an angry and jealous 19-year-old bought an AR-15, brought it to a party Paul's son was attending, and turned it into a tragedy.
19 kids in the house. They're good kids from good, loving families, including Anna Bowie, who was the ex-girlfriend of the shooter, and he was wanting to get back together with her. She didn't want that. He, the shooter, quickly went from wanting her to hating her to wanting to kill her to wanting to kill her and anyone that she was associating with. There was a long stream of text messages with a friend of his. There were posts to social media after he acquired the Ruger AR-556 from Cabela's just days prior to the shooting. He was enraged and fixated on killing her and anyone that she was associating with. He texted his friend, "I'm a shooter. I'm killing everyone at a huge party." Literally, his words. One of the guys, Jake Long, good friend of my son's, he sees the shooter with the gun. He turns to run away, saying, "No, no, no." Shooter opens fire. puts 5 bullets in Jake Long's back. Will gets hit. The bullet narrowly misses his spine, but it hits his shoulder blade and is deflected up in his body. Jordan Ebner ran for the door to go in the house, and the shooter just went after him, followed him, put 6 bullets into him, some at close range, like standing right above him. Then he goes in the house, and the 15 that were in the house, most of them ran to go hide for their lives. Anna Bowie was just, the way it's told, was just curled up under the dining room table. She didn't run away. And the shooter went in and just stood above her and put 5 bullets in her. The changes in laws from this initiative are not asking for too much.
I-1639 makes it illegal for anyone under the age of 21 to buy a semi-automatic rifle. It also requires a 10-day waiting period and an enhanced background check that probes medical, mental health, court, and criminal records. And it requires background checks to be repeated at least once a year, every year after the purchase. It extends the annual background check requirement to pistol owners as well. I-1639 also creates potential felony penalties for all gun owners if a child or a felon gains access to an unsecured firearm and hurts someone. A securely stored gun is defined as one that is locked up and unloaded. It gives gun owners a 5-day window to report the theft of a firearm to avoid prosecution. For a long time, Washington State has been an outlier, a blue state with loose gun laws, liberal on social issues with legal marijuana and strict environmental regulations, but you can still bring a gun inside the state capitol building. The Washington State Constitution has even stronger protections for the right to bear arms than the U.S. Constitution, stating the right of the individual citizen to bear arms in defense of himself or the state shall not be impaired. Washington is divided by the Cascade Mountain Range and wildly different viewpoints, from the congested urban corridors of Seattle and Bellevue to the wide open farms and thick stands of timber in rural and eastern Washington. The major population centers are blue. Democrats control the state legislature and the governor's office, but most of the counties are red. The tech-fueled population explosion in the Puget Sound region has tilted the balance of power more to the left. In the last several years, voters have approved a series of gun control initiatives originating in Seattle. In 2014, Initiative 594 mandated universal background checks on gun sales. In 2016, voters approved a red flag law, Initiative 1491. It authorized extreme risk protection orders, which allow police to preemptively seize guns from people if a family member, a loved one, or an officer can convince a judge that they pose a threat in a secret court hearing. The mass shooting in Las Vegas in October of 2017 spurred the state legislature to ban bump stocks, but calls for a ban on the sale of assault weapons and large capacity magazines fell flat.
Las Vegas, Orlando, Virginia Tech, Sandy Hook.
The February 2018 mass shooting at Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, threw gas on the flames of the smoldering gun control debate in Washington State. The student-led March for Our Lives effort sparked school walkouts, rallies, and marches demanding new restrictions. Riding the momentum, the Alliance for Gun Responsibility got to work on their most ambitious gun control package yet, Initiative 1639.
1639 was the most comprehensive ballot initiative that we've had in Washington State's history and potentially in the entire country.
From their Seattle headquarters, Alliance CEO Renee Hopkins believes Washington State has reached a tipping point in how most people feel about guns.
Washington State continues to lead the country in terms of passing common sense gun laws in the last 5 years. There's no other state that has made the kind of progress that we have. What I know is consistent across the board is that people want their communities to be safe. They want their children to be safe. They want their children to be safe whether they're walking down the street or in schools or in a movie theater. They want their children to be safe from suicide. They want their communities to be safe. And that is a universal truth across the state.
For the first time, I-1639 had defined the term assault rifle in state law. In Washington, any semi-automatic rifle is now classified as a semi-automatic assault rifle.
This is now considered an assault rifle.
The initiative made these rifles subject to the same regulations that apply to handgun sales, but the initiative went further than that, with the annual background check provision, mandatory safety training, and the secure storage requirement for all firearms. The initiative had grassroots support from energized young people and millions in backing from deep-pocket donors, but it faced a difficult road to the ballot. Opponents challenged the ballot description in court and flagged improper formatting on the petition signature sheets. They argued voters didn't know what they were signing up for.
This isn't about guns. This is about rights.
A Superior Court judge first blocked it from the ballot, but the state Supreme Court reversed that ruling. I-1639 was certified in late July, and the election wasn't even close.
So it passed with 60% of the votes statewide. It is absolutely positively undeniable that it is a public health crisis, and we need to continue focusing the conversation on a public health approach to gun violence prevention, and we look forward to continuing to be a part of that.
That sentiment reflects the popular view from Seattle's crowded streets, where voters approved I-1639 by an overwhelming 76% margin. But the views are a lot different in rural parts of the state, like Klickitat County along the Oregon border, where 60% of voters said no. The yes on I-1639 votes were heavily centered in the dense population centers surrounding the Puget Sound in the west, and to a lesser extent, Spokane in the east and Vancouver, Washington to the south. But the majority of counties voted it down, and some of these rural counties would become the new front line in the battle over state gun restrictions. Several major law enforcement groups had come out against I-1639 during the campaign. The groups raised concerns about broad or vague language in the initiative, potential problems with enforcement, and a lack of resources to perform the additional background checks. After 1639 passed in 2018, the Bellevue-based Second Amendment Foundation and the NRA filed a lawsuit challenging it in federal court. The initiative was set to take effect in 2 tiers, some regulations starting in January 2019, others July 1st. But opposition to the package of gun control measures didn't die down.
Are we going to let them take our rights?
Several local government bodies passed resolutions declaring their communities Second Amendment sanctuaries.
Give me liberty or give me death. Our Second Amendment is infringed upon by gun grabbers who have no knowledge about firearms, pushing an agenda based purely on emotion and without any fact or evidence, while doing nothing to disarm the criminals.
By early 2019, sheriffs representing more than 20 of Washington's 39 counties had indicated that they would not or could not actively enforce all parts of the gun initiative. Some sheriffs publicly said it was unconstitutional. Others announced they would not actively seek out violators until the lawsuit was resolved. And some said it was simply unenforceable without taking a particular stance.
Overall, it's still a fairly conservative county. And I know I'm at home when I see a pickup truck with rifle racks. I think I was probably the first sheriff to come out and announce I will not support it.
One of the most vocal opponents is Sheriff Bob Songer of Klickitat County.
This hoodwinked job they pulled with 1639 with signatures is an illegal law. It's not legal. And so therefore, I'm not going to enforce an illegal law. Why would I go to the residents of my county and arrest them for a violation of an illegal law? Makes no sense.
My job is to make sure the law is followed, and what I'm here to say is the law is going to be followed even if these sheriffs go AWOL and don't do their job. That's the most important thing for me to say.
The initiative had some high-profile supporters, including Governor and former Democratic presidential candidate Jay Inslee and Democratic State Attorney General Bob Ferguson. Ferguson has championed several gun control bills in recent years, including a proposed ban on the sale of assault rifles and high-capacity magazines.
I know it'll be an uphill challenge getting passed in the legislature, but as the Attorney General, I'm in charge of law enforcement and public safety I'm supporting that lead on this issue.
Attorney General Ferguson issued an open letter to sheriffs across the state in February of 2019, warning that they could be held liable for refusing to enforce the new gun restrictions, in particular the additional background checks. Writing, quote, "In short, the taxpayers of your city or county assume the financial risk of your decision to impose your personal views over the law," end quote. Ferguson then sent a follow-up letter in March characterized as an effort to clear up any misconceptions about what the law requires.
As sheriff, I'm elected by the people. Ferguson's not my boss, nor is the governor. And so given that, I have a lot of discretion on what laws I enforce. Now, I believe that law is unconstitutional, so I will not enforce it. And I have the discretion to arrest or not arrest.
Attorney General Ferguson's office refused multiple requests for an interview, citing concerns about commenting on an issue under litigation. Ferguson did address the resistance from sheriffs at an event hosted by the Alliance for Gun Responsibility on the one-year anniversary of the school shooting in Parkland, Florida.
The rule of law is what binds us as a people. When it comes to performing enhanced background checks, a key part of the initiative, and really a key part of what local law enforcement does, it's their job. They do it currently for the purchase of handguns. They've done it for many, many years. I've never once heard any sheriff or local law enforcement official say they should not be performing those enhanced background checks to purchase handguns, or claim they're somehow unconstitutional. What's different about AR-15?
I don't have a problem checking to see if somebody's a convicted felon, convicted of domestic violence that prohibit them from having a firearm, or if they've been committed to a mental institution or currently under psychiatric care for homicidal tendencies or violence. I think we all agree those individuals should not possess a firearm or a baseball bat, a knife, or any kind of weapon. I do not have a problem if all we're checking there is mental health. But when it starts delving into your other medical records, what kind of medications you're taking and so forth, and it doesn't say in 1639 who makes a decision that you no longer can possess a firearm. And so that's a real slippery slope to go down. In other words, government could come by and say, well, you know, you were going through a bout of depression for a while, so we got you on antidepressant medication. That disqualifies you from having a firearm. And so you have to give up your guns. Then they want the sheriff once a year to check all these medical records to see if you're still eligible to possess a firearm. A firearm, not just semi-automatic, any firearm. I believe it's unconstitutional. I believe it's using coercion to get your medical records.
Hello, private sector.
Donald Teague owns Private Sector Arms in Olympia. He's been getting a lot of questions since the initiative passed.
If it is a semi-automatic, that means when you pull the trigger, it kicks out your shell and loads your next one, and when you release the trigger, it's ready to fire again. One trigger pull, one round. So what everybody's worried about right now is this little guy right here, the very, very big one, your HEPA rights. Do you understand that by signing this application, you are waiving confidentiality? You're allowing them to give it not just to the law enforcement agency, but also to whatever court, and they can take it from any health facility that you've ever come into contact with.
Renee Hopkins says the changes in gun ownership laws are good public policy and reflect the popular will of Washington voters.
I think it's hugely disappointing, and I think it's hugely disappointing, especially when you have law enforcement leaders who their sole purpose is to keep their community safe, and instead of focusing their energy on what it takes to actually do that, they're partaking in political grandstanding.
I see it as a big part of my job as sheriff, but what upsets them is they can't get a handle on sheriffs throughout this state, the majority of sheriffs, that just don't fold and go along with their program because they feel it's unconstitutional. The Constitution has got to be the Constitution. We do away with the Constitution, we do not have America anymore.
I respect sheriffs' right to express an opinion about this law. They have a First Amendment right to disagree with whether they think it would be a good idea for legislators or voters to vote for it. But they do not have a right to think that there are many Supreme Courts.
For the Kramers, the pushback from county-level law enforcement leaders is maddening.
For them to just boldly and blatantly state that they're not going to enforce this law is just wrong. We don't get to pick and choose.
Of course I'm angry, of course. But for anybody to be able to get a gun at that age and not be responsible with a weapon, it doesn't matter who it is. It's heartbreaking to see that this can even be possible, that anybody can get access to a gun and hurt somebody.
Government has no business how you store your firearm in that house, in your home. If there's an accident and it's determined through investigation that you were negligent, then you face the music. But government should not be telling you how to store your firearms for self-defense reasons and various other reasons.
Danner slows down because he was going to help the gentleman, and once he realized it was a gun, he went around him.
Authorities are investigating a shooting spree in Tumwater.
Police say the suspect was killed here by a bystander with a gun. Brian is just thinking about that armed man that stepped in.
He is a hero. He is a hero. If this customer hadn't done what he did, I mean, yeah, he's a hero.
So I'm the president of this rifle club, but I'm a certified personal protection firearm instructor.
Okay, so the strap on these concealed carry purses have a wire inside of them, so it cannot be cut. I carry all the time. Nobody knows you're telling my secret.
Several years ago, I opened my front door and confronted two men in my home. I didn't know who they are. It was a terrible experience to go through. I survived that, got the two men arrested. You know, I personally can't fight two men with my hands, but because of that situation, I had a real passion to help women to protect themselves. I volunteer hundreds of hours a year teaching women how to use firearms safely for personal protection. Again, very light, no recoil.
Firearms instructor Jane Milhans feels that the new gun regulations, the storage requirements, and barriers to purchase put women at risk.
Do I need 30 rounds in that rifle? Who says how many rounds it will take to stop a threat? That's how many you need. I timed a lady last year in her 70s. It took her 15 minutes to get into the safe, get the firearm out, load it, and be ready to go. And you don't have that time. Even with my home invasion, it took law enforcement over 15 minutes to get to my house. Every day, people protect themselves with firearms. It happens every day, all across the country.
Know that patriots all over the state are tired of you weaponizing your office, using the Washington State Patrol as a private army to enforce unconstitutional laws. We are not afraid of you, neither are the sheriffs across the state.
People who do not follow the law are still subject to criminal prosecution, and I've made clear that they could be still subject to criminal prosecution through the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General's office has jurisdiction to do criminal prosecutions, even if the sheriffs won't. Now, this does not relieve the sheriffs of obligation, in my mind, to enforce the law.
Well, if he wants to do the background checks, have at it. But coming to force other parts of the law, I would tell him to get the hell out of my county. I think if it gets to a point where law enforcement is told or is required to confiscate firearms, I think you'll see a revolution in this country. Because I know a lot of people, literally, and they're not joking, that if you come to take their legal gun, you'd have a fight on your hands. And why would I jeopardize my law enforcement officers, my deputies, to that kind of situation when in your own heart and mind, you know it's unconstitutional? Won't do it.
Former Republican State Attorney General Rob McKenna thinks the situation with I-1639 is a mess and symptomatic of political trends.
I think there is a divide between the rural and the urban areas, and that, as has been the case for many years, people in the rural areas feel like the urbanites are ganging up on them and imposing their will on them. The gun control debate and Initiative 1639 are just the latest example of that. clearly the attitudes that you see in rural areas towards guns are different on average than in the cities, but the votes are in the cities. I think that the sheriffs who are choosing not to enforce all the provisions of Initiative 1639 are in fact drawing on experiences that they've seen elsewhere in the state and in the country, where you have a state attorney general or a United States attorney general declare that they don't agree with certain laws and therefore they choose not to enforce them. In a sense, it gives other officials the same kind of license, at least at a sort of moral and political level, to pick and choose the laws they're going to enforce. Just like for years the city of Seattle decided it didn't want to enforce certain drug laws, and maybe choosing to do that right now, not enforce certain drug laws involving hard drugs. Anytime you have an environment where law enforcement and elected officials can announce selective enforcement or selective prosecution, it creates an environment where others can raise their hand and say, well, I can do that too on an issue that I care about. And I think that's happening right now with the sheriffs from the counties that didn't support Initiative 1639.
The current state attorney general also responded to this characterization in his first open letter to sheriffs. Ferguson wrote, "Analogies to marijuana and immigration law enforcement are misplaced. This is not a situation where the federal government is trying to force the state to enforce federal laws."
So there's already 237 pages of restrictive gun laws on the federal level and numerous gun laws on the state level. So the thing is that there is no additional law that will legislate evil or carnage or someone wanting to commit an evil act. No law will stop that.
I think that overall the state is still more purple than it is blue or red. It's clear that of course, that Seattle is growing rapidly and those voters are not conservatives, but that at the same time, other counties that used to be reliably Democratic are voting Republican.
The average citizen, right or left leaning to political ideals, has one thing that we can all agree on right now. We are all disenfranchised. We do not feel like our voices are being heard. Our government at all levels is out of control, and we need to regain that control.
You've got some of the rural counties that used to be solidly Democratic swinging over to vote Republican, even while Seattle becomes a deeper shade of blue.
Show me what democracy looks like! This is what democracy looks like!
We will no longer risk our lives waiting for adults to take action.
It's a dynamic process, and it's driven by demographics, economics, and I think one would be foolish to assume that whatever the state of play is today is permanent, because it's probably not.
So I think it's really easy to try to polarize this issue into urban versus rural, Republican versus Democrat, but when you see the kind of numbers that we see with all three of our initiatives, between 60 and 70% passage across the state, that simply doesn't hold true.
Anytime somebody starts telling you, well, I don't have any problem with you having guns, we just want common sense gun control. That's a red flag. That's a red flag. No, common sense to who? To them. And if you don't buy into their agenda, then you're some right-wing guy and all this. Bottom line is, if they were totally honest with you, they'd want all of your guns.
It's frustrating, because I'd like to think that the county sheriffs, other law enforcement officials in our rural counties would uphold the law of the state of Washington. So it's frustrating, it's disappointing, and it's frustrating. I do think there's a political angle, and they get some publicity around speaking out in these ways. In the end, the rule of law will win out.